Good afternoon everyone, my name is Rob Chichester. I'm the Junior Vice Chair of RTPI Cymru and a Director at CTJ Architects and Town Planners. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar on Transport Delivering for Climate Action, part of the Welsh Planners Live 2020 organised by the RTPI Cymru. I'd firstly like to thank our sponsors, Savills and Francis Taylor Buildings, for supporting this year's event. This week's webinars are looking at how planning and planners can take climate action. Transport plays a significant role in the climate change agenda, and this webinar will discuss how development can be planned to provide sustainable transport and the importance of the shift needed to active travel. I'm delighted to be joined today by Natalie Grohmann of Welsh Government and Mike Axon of Vectos. Natalie is the Head of Active Travel and Road Safety Policy for Welsh Government and leads on the implementation of Wales's landmark active travel legislation and on road safety policy. Mike is the Managing Director of Vectos with 30 years transport and mobility experience in the development industry. His areas of expertise include transport master planning, advising on transport policy, and directing innovative transport approach to the schemes. If delegates are tweeting, please use the hashtag #WalesPlanLive 2020, and we invite in delegates to submit questions during the session in the question function box. We'll try to address as many questions to our speakers following their presentations. I'm now going to pass you over to Mike to begin his presentation. Good afternoon, Mike.
You need to turn your microphone on, Mike. Your microphone's muted.
I'm back. Can you hear me, Rob?
Yes, afternoon, Mike. I'll hand you over.
Thank you very, very much indeed. Sorry for that little blip there. Well, look, thank you very much, everybody. I'll start off with this. It's perhaps no surprise that, if you like, the mindsets of the younger generations create these policies of the future. It's the millennials that are currently influential. For this generation, it was the internet that was new and exciting, and they embraced, if you like, the sharing economy. They were less likely to be interested in the status of car ownership, and for many, having to drive was a bit of an inconvenience. But look at what happened to car driving in these cities. Each of these cities adopted a different approach to transport. Starting from different places, what happened is the car drivers all became part of this downward converging trend with the rise of the millennials. But the generation reaching adulthood now, for these people, the internet is simply oxygen. That's all it is. Unlike the earlier generation, this generation was born with the internet. It's augmented reality. It's not at all special. Other changes are in play. And as a result, society is changing more quickly than our policies themselves can change it. We're playing catch up. The cause célèbre of this younger generation is in fact climate change. So this is consistent with the progressive method of transport planning, which is vision and validate. Establish the vision, define what you want to see, review your design or your management to make sure that this is what indeed you will achieve. It's actually not about transport anymore. No longer, for instance, do we automatically build roads in urban areas to accommodate a notional, often unfettered demand. Instead, we define the amount of movement, and that movement might be traffic, that we want to see. And we manipulate capacity up or down to achieve that. The thing is, traffic is a function of road space. Increasing road space increases traffic. Reducing road space reduces traffic. It's a fundamental law. Now, these societal and design trends were happening pre-COVID. COVID has accelerated them, some by perhaps up to 10 years. Active travel is on the rise, particularly since the COVID outbreak, and encouraged in many authority areas by reallocation of road space, as people also minimise their inconvenience by taking advantage of less physical forms of active travel. Now, vision and validate by a different name is really the approach that Cardiff adopted in its last local development plan. So traffic volumes in Cardiff, for instance, have been static or falling, whilst the population has been rising and in commuting has been rising. Look at this. In 2010, if Cardiff had built roads and bigger junctions to accommodate the then notional industry standard forecast for extra traffic, it would have over-provided by some 20% on current levels, unnecessarily, and at a climate, health and realm cost. And of course, this is all very important when it comes to looking at what we do about climate. The thing is, what does it all mean? Why do we care? Should we compromise to achieve climate change? The generally accepted answers are the end of the world as we know it, because we don't want the end of the world as we know it, and yes. So we are planning for climate change, but we're not really planning for climate change. That graph there is what we need to achieve to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C by 2050, standard target. Are we really going to achieve that? So, of the available big wins, surface transport is about as big a big win as one can get. Industry and power, that's doing well. Buildings are on a downward trend. Surface transport hasn't shifted. It's now the biggest contributor. But there has been a little peek at what actually can happen. So during lockdown, we saw about a 30% reduction in CO2 emissions, half of which was as a result of less surface transport. But keep that in mind, because even that effect, the effect of lockdown, isn't enough to meet this year's reduction target in carbon emissions. This illustrates the massive year-on-year task. Some may say, which is only achievable by making big plans, not little plans. As Lord Kershaw said, I think last week, there is a need for urgency and high ambition. There has been a degree of response, the uptake of ultra-low emission vehicles, for instance, electric and hybrid vehicles. But at the moment, this makes up less than 1% of the 38 million vehicles in the UK. But other things have been happening, which makes it easier for us to design to limit emissions. I talked earlier about the COVID accelerated trends. One of those is working from home, something that may well be a long-lasting change. And this in itself presents its own opportunities, because what we're really talking about now is not actual travel, it's accessibility by whatever means. And that's what matters most to a healthy, inclusive society. Accessibility, firmly digital now. The European buzz phrase is the 20-minute town. Now, it may be 15 or 30 minutes, depending on which country you live in, but that's effectively the principle is the same. We are now designing new settlements in the UK for 70 to 80% of accessibility contained within the local area. And for that accessibility to be reached largely by online or active travel. Now, this isn't so difficult. We as planners, transport planners, used to focus on travel to work, actually largely because the statistics were easy to use. But this wasn't the main reason that people travelled, and it certainly isn't now. Education, leisure, visiting friends, having a good time, all of these things are as important or more important, particularly when you consider movement and accessibility across the entire day. Bearing in mind that as traffic engineers, the norm used to be to limit consideration to the commuter peaks. Actual travel now is the third question after, can I do it online? And can I do it online and get it delivered? And if I need to be mobile, the first question is, can I do it by classic mobility, easy, 2 feet and 2 wheels, or some form of micro-mobility? Importantly now, in the design, our new settlements are actually designed with the active travel network as the primary movement network, alongside which there may be some roads. And after all of that, the question is, can I do it efficiently? Can I choose the most efficient form of fuel? So practically, we bring these ideas together in the design of new settlements and in the retrofitting of existing settlements. For new settlements, we might expect to achieve a 20 to 40% reduction in carbon emissions overall, that's overall, compared with the historic design norm, just from our treatment of surface transport. The key is in the master planning. Frankly, it's not really about transport at all. So mobility hubs such as these are being designed into new and existing settlements. As the name implies, these are the hubs of all things mobility, but also potentially community. So in these primary hubs, as in this picture, expect to find bike hire, e-bike hire, scooter hire, the ability to buy a Mars bar or a cup of coffee, possibly a place to work for an hour or two or fix your own bike, a place for organising car share, a hub for public transport, traditional or modern, and we have different sizes and different shapes. All kinds of things are available. In Bremen, for instance, these tertiary hubs, the idea is that they will be available every 300 metres throughout the inner city. And that statistic of 4,200 private cars being replaced by 290 car share cars is impressive, but not actually as impressive as the aim in Bergen, where they seek to reduce the total number of cars owned in Bergen to 4,000 for a city of maybe 200, 250,000 people. So these mobility hubs, they give us the opportunity for other things as well. So for instance, to introduce a community concierge team. And this is wonderful because it opens up this multitude of possibility, all of which go with this 20-minute town. So for instance, the community concierge is available for, say, parcel deliveries. That's micro consolidation. Encouraging the second question, can I do it online and get it delivered? Furthermore, as collecting parcels from the hub means local interaction, it's great for physical and mental health, or alternatively, onward delivery, maybe by cargo bike or ground drone, which are up to 40 times more efficient than white vans. This community concierge can manage the IT platforms for vehicle sharing and demand responsive transport, and they are and can be organisers of school travel. In addition, they may or may not manage a third place. So COVID has seen the rapid delivery of these third places. This is something we were already designing into communities before COVID, but they're now becoming quite commonplace in the local high streets. And they're places to work from when you're working at home, but you don't want to work from home. And they could readily be a foil to the reducing attractiveness of retail, for instance, in town centres. Worth checking out, if I can say it, Brewdog's Desk Dog. I got that. Where for £7 a day, you've got a place to work, unlimited coffee. Potentially, there's some friends there too. And at the end of the day, a free pint of beer. Sounds good. On top of all of this, there's the tech. And it's all good stuff. So demand responsive transport. There's the buying ride economy. There's autonomous vehicles, technology exists now, ground drones already being used, airborne drones, all a part of, if you like, Dave Brailsford's marginal gains. But there's an issue with this, which we do actually need to overcome. And that's getting it to the mass market. Now, in the fashion industry, it can take 3 weeks to get a new idea from the catwalk into the mass market. For us, 10 years. Must do better. So in summary, if I can say this, the younger generations are dictating now our pace of change and our issues. And the issue is climate. Vision and validate. It's the future. The biggest opportunity for big wins is surface transport. It will make a difference. It's achievable. And then lastly, designing for community, capturing the best of what we've got, making big plans, not little plans, and doing it now is the vision that is required for the big wins that really do address the big issue. Thank you very much. Back to you, Rob.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. As I pointed out earlier, hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end of the presentations. But now I'm going to pass you over to Natalie to begin her presentation. Thank you, Natalie.
Good afternoon. And I do need to make a note that I need to look up what digital is. I haven't come across that before. So yeah, so after Mike took a very big view of how transport and climate change interact and how that can change, I've been asked to look at active travel specifically and how active travel can contribute to reducing climate change, what might be changing that picture, and I also want to look at how our active travel legislation in Wales and how we implement it has a role to play in this. So, yes, climate change, of course, is a huge global issue, and often this can seem quite sort of disempowering and overwhelming, and so local action can seem a little bit pointless. And I think partly also reflected when we look at Welsh CO2 emissions. Transport accounts for 14% of that, and that's the whole of the transport sector, freight, buses, trains, all of private transport. And so we can already see that the sort of contribution we can hope to make is quite small. But nonetheless, walking and cycling are emission-free, at least at the point of use, when we don't look at the embedded carbon. And so they are obviously the ideal transport mode to look at when we're trying to reduce climate change risks. And currently, however, in Wales, we're starting from a very low base. Especially cycling is quite a niche activity still. Only 6% of adults make at least one cycling trip a week, higher for men, lower for women. And even with walking, which is so much more common, actually, when we look at it, a huge proportion of people don't even walk once a week for a sort of proper trip. And of course, walking and cycling trips tend to be short, so all of the walking trips are under 5 miles, and most of cycling trips are too. And so in terms of the overall mileage impact, when we look at walking and cycling, it is of course relatively small. So most analyses and modelling that have looked at the sort of difference that walking and cycling can make in terms of bringing our carbon emissions down have arrived at the sort of conclusion that yes, it makes a difference, but it's quite a modest contribution. And I think that is, you know, in the current scenario, probably not unreasonable. However, because walking and cycling have got so many other huge benefits in all these sectors, I think it has become very widely accepted that it is the right thing to pursue. And generally, I mean, even the UK government with their ambitious changing gear document in July has shown that even they take it seriously now. So it is not just Wales that is trying to get walking and cycling properly on the agenda. It is really widely recognised. So I think it's worth a further look in terms of the displacement potential. So when we actually look at the mileage that's driven by cars currently, both as drivers and passengers, you know, when we look at trips under 5 miles, there's still quite a large proportion that could theoretically be substituted for active modes. And quite recent research looked at actually cases in Cardiff in some depth, and they worked out that even with all things staying otherwise unchanged, that there was a realistic chance to substitute up to 41% of short car trips, and therefore having a not unsubstantial CO2 reduction. However, I think there is reasons for possible optimism, because I think there are other factors at play that really can help us move this on and realize this potential. And I think in the last few years we have really seen a sort of alignment of major policies in land use and transport planning that really take something that has been recognised for a long time, but is now giving a lot more emphasis, and that's the sort of idea of the sustainable transport hierarchy. And Mike showed other versions of how we understand that. And I think by putting this really at the heart of how we do planning, how we develop our transport systems, and think about spatial planning in the wider sense, it really has the potential to lay foundation. Obviously, this is not going to be an overnight change, and it does need to be translated into real different decisions at the local level, at the national level. But I think the foundations have never been better to build on. And allied to this, there's a whole range of other policy drivers that have now recognized how walking and cycling can support their own objectives. And I think that can be seen in the education field, in the health field, in the environment field. And so there are a lot of other policy areas that align around active travel and will help us try and achieve this elusive modal shift that we are hoping for. The third element, and I think this is really, I mean, it's not new, but it's quite exciting really, is the potential of e-bikes to really transform the view of what kind of car trips could be substituted by cycling in particular. And studies from Denmark have shown that in e-bike trials, people did commutes of up to 30 kilometers without any problems and very willingly on e-bikes. And that really changes how we have looked at cycling as a potential sort of medium distance mode in the past. And if we look at the same data again that I showed earlier, when we look at the sort of range between 20 and 25 miles, 25 miles might be pushing it a bit, but certainly in between there, that is a huge number of car trips that could potentially be looked at for substitution. So, yeah, e-bikes definitely have the potential to attract people who are basically not fit. They don't want to change their clothes. They might live on top of a hill, and they wouldn't otherwise consider doing a longer cycling journey. But with an e-bike, that suddenly becomes possible. So I think they are a really exciting opportunity. And fourthly, and Mike has talked about this at some point as well, I think it is way too early to try and predict how COVID is going to change travel patterns in the long term. But it becomes increasingly clear that it's very unlikely that we will go back to the same travel patterns that we have had before. And we have seen that business developers are starting to react to that and think about how they can make their spaces more active travel friendly. We're seeing that loads more people will continue to work from home, either part-time or full-time. And so the whole opportunities to drop children off at school by walking or cycling become completely different than when they then have to go on to a faraway workplace. And the Welsh Government has stated their intention to really enable remote working in the future. And to enable that, we are going to look at remote working hubs that are close to people's home, and that will really change these kind of traditional commuting patterns in the future. And as I say, we can't quite see yet how that's going to manifest itself, but I think we can be fairly certain that there will be change. And what was also interesting, the sort of survey work that has been done in relation to COVID, that people also wanting to make that change. So they've welcomed the opportunities they've had to make more local journeys, do more local shopping, and they intend to continue with that in the future. And so the question for us is really, how can we make this easy and convenient for them, and how can we embed this change on an ongoing basis? So basically, how do we move a school run from something that is dominated by SUVs to something that is dominated by kids walking, cycling, scooting, wheeling? And how we turn a bicycle that is still overwhelmingly seen by many people as something that you do for fitness or leisure, to something that is genuinely used by a whole range of population to move themselves, move stuff, and just have a utility value, as well as still being used for recreation and leisure and exercise. So the barriers to achieving that have traditionally been, and that still continue to be, mainly safety, a lot in terms of practicality. So it's questions around trip chaining, the weather, the topography, but yeah, a lot of it is around how safe people feel walking and cycling. On the plus side, you know, most people are able to walk or wheel, and also most people know how to ride a bike, and even most people have access to a bike. So the conditions are there to change. So how is our Active Travel Act going to help with this whole agenda? I think whilst we cannot change the weather or the topography of Wales, we have the opportunity to tackle safety and to some degree also practicality. And I think that's where the Active Travel Act comes in. We've had it for a number of years now, but because it has a slow build-up, we've only just really gone through the first cycle of its implementation. So the Act looks at walking and cycling, particularly for journeys that are purposeful, that go to a destination. So it doesn't really cover recreational walking and cycling, which is deliberate. And the way the Act is going to doing this is by basically focusing local authorities' attention on thinking very strategically about their active travel networks and what they need. So this is being applied to all the largest places in Wales. 142 is the number that they must cover, but they can also do other ones if they feel there's a need or opportunity to do so. So what the way this is done is by firstly mapping the existing infrastructure and then looking ahead and looking what do we need to get to. And the whole idea is based on the fact that we have been doing active travel infrastructure in Wales for a very long time, but it was often done quite opportunistically, sort of associated with a special scheme or as a one-off or as an individual route, but not as a network. So I'm sure lots of you will be familiar with signs like the ones on this slide, where you just find you're being abandoned in the road again. And so this is to change this, and we are actually moving from a situation where we have some excellent bits of small active travel infrastructure to build networks that actually enable people to make journeys from their home to their destination that are seamless. We are a long way from that, but we had the first iteration of maps in 2018, and the next review is due next year. Right. So this duty to basically develop the plans is then accompanied with other duties, which is to make year-on-year improvements on their networks. So it means actually creating new routes, improving routes that aren't quite good enough, and really starting to make these networks a reality. There's also duties on local authorities and the Welsh Government, and this one is quite often overlooked, to basically, whenever we do anything in the highway space, to look whether we can improve provisions for walkers and cyclists. And that is so that is whether we are resurfacing or whether we are changing a junction. We always need to look at whether there's an opportunity to make the situation better. So we're not just tied to these specific routes that we have mapped. And this is coupled with a duty to promote active travel, which is also, it's on the whole local authority. It's not just on the highways department. And again, that is something that we're trying to get better at getting that word out, that actually the duties of the active travel apply to all departments. They're not limited to transport. And then local authorities need to report on what they're doing as well. So I mentioned at the heart of the Act is really to try and create convenient, safe and practical infrastructure. And so it is accompanied by statutory design guidance, which we have consulted on this year, and we are looking to publish the revised version very soon. And this infrastructure really is trying to get what we have in Wales up to the standards that we've witnessed in other countries and that we really value. So there's some pictures of the ideal kind of infrastructure you might see. However, of course, in Wales, we often find ourselves in situations that are quite different, and it's hard to see how you might fit this ideal infrastructure in. So I think what the guidance is trying to do is create a sort of toolbox whereby there is some flexibility and allowing different thinking about how you might deal with different situations, rather than applying a rigid model of what active travel infrastructure should look like. So it's encouraging local authorities to find local solutions that suit their networks. The other pillar that is really important in the Active Travel Act and the guidance is that the networks that are being planned need to be underpinned by really solid engagement and consultation with local communities. And this is particularly important because the infrastructure that we plan will only be used if it is actually the right one for what people need. So the engagement, we often find that it's quite easy to engage with existing cyclists on schemes. There will be very strong views on whether something is amiss, whether schemes are required, they're good, they're bad, but getting non-active travel users and whether walkers or cyclists to engage in these processes is quite challenging. So we're trying to find new ways of enabling local authorities to do this better over the coming year. And yes, because whilst it's very valuable to have these views of people who are already walking and cycling, in order to get the mode shift that we need to make sure that we speak to people who aren't and find out why and what might change their minds. So the third pillar then is to actually provide funding for the infrastructure to put it in place. Historically, levels for active travel funding have been reasonably low. I mean, it's been going up over the last 10 years, certainly, but with the establishment of these integrated network maps that local authorities have to create, we now also have a dedicated active travel fund to make those a reality. So this year we have already allocated over 33 million to active travel projects, and on top of that we've also allocated over 16 million to temporary COVID responsive measures, similarly to ones that you might have read about. And on top of that, we have our own transport projects which need to be accompanied, as I said, by the active travel improvements as a integrated part of the schemes now. And of course, local authorities have the opportunity to draw down other funding sources to supplement the funding that we can provide. So thirdly then, funding for behaviour change activities is rarer than capital at the moment, unfortunately. So we are more limited in what we can do there, but we allow local authorities to use their capital funding to also undertake promotion. And as I said, it's actually part of the Act that they need to do that. So we're doing a variety of things. A lot of it is focused on schools because they're such an important part to try and reach the early visit behaviour change kind of agenda. So a lot of this is kind of focused on getting children and their parents to understand the benefits of walking and cycling to school. So in summary, I think it's clear that active travel is not going to save the planet, but if we get these things right, we can certainly make a good contribution to it, to reducing carbon emissions. So, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Natalie. So we've come to the end of our presentations now. As noted earlier, We are now open for questions from the delegates, so please feel free to send those through and we'll try and get through as many as we can. Mike, are you going to come join us now for the discussions and some questions?
I'm back, yes. Hello.
Excellent. So just in a general term, guys, Mike, in terms of the city centres, as you mentioned earlier, we've obviously seen a rapid implementation in Cardiff city centre of COVID measures and protocols. So post-COVID, how do you see the sort of revaluation of city spaces and the need for a model shift and potentially the connected and autonomous vehicles, which seem to be cropping up all the time in my discussions with garden villages at the moment?
Right, if I can just take a couple of questions in there, I think, Rob, which is how do I see city centres and town centres, or may I expand that to towns and cities post-COVID, and then what's going to happen with autonomous vehicles and the like. So I think I've seen many towns and cities in the UK take the opportunity in COVID to actually reallocate road space, and Cardiff is one of them. And the consequence of reallocating road space tends to be that you can actually move more people because, of course, as Natalie will probably say, walking and cycling could be up to 6 or 7 times more efficient in space terms than actually using private vehicles. And so I see that in some towns and cities, that's going to stick. There are other places, though, which haven't done that. And we've already seen a return to traffic levels, pre-COVID traffic levels in some places, particularly for local trips, the sort of sub 5 mile trips, Natalie, that you were talking about. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, I think, Rob. I think we will see some benefits from it, but I don't think we'll see the benefits that we might have derived from it, unless, of course, we go into a second lockdown and we have more problems in that way. When it comes to autonomous vehicles, that's really an extension of buying a ride. So an Uber at the moment is like an autonomous vehicle with a driver, and that's the model that autonomous vehicles will follow. And there is a situation where if autonomous vehicles come forward in 5 or 10 years' time, the technology is just about there, that you will be able to buy a ride using these things very, very easily, and possibly close to public transport price point. And there's a question there about whether actually that will be so attractive that we'll end up with a lot more congestion, with people simply choosing to use these types of facilities. And it's potentially a danger as well as a potential benefit. And I think that's why we need to be master planning our towns and cities, and actually starting in order of priority. It's online, then virtual mobility, active travel, then shared travel. So I think, Rob, it's a good question. What we're certain of is that we're not certain of the future, but maybe we need to control it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mike. Turning to you, Natalie, so in line with your comments on the active travel, do you think there's currently underinvestment in active travel? And what investment is needed to achieve the goals you've set out, really?
As I say, it's been increasing quite a lot, and actually, to be fair, so this year we've had a regular pot of 30 million plus 5 for sort of school-related projects, and then we found this the extra COVID money, or we made it available. So this year there really has been quite a large amount of money, similar amounts last year, and I don't think we would have necessarily been ready much earlier to spend these kind of amounts without risking wasting some of it on schemes that weren't really well designed, that weren't really well thought out. We find that, now with the plans, and I say they're going to be reworked for next year and revised and hopefully consulted on detail, we still need to go back over them and recheck that actually what we're proposing to do is the right thing, because quite often there is a sort of an assumption that big is beautiful. So for example, when you have a dual carriageway or an urban dual carriageway, say, an instinct might be to put a footbridge or a foot and cycle bridge over it, rather than just slowing down the traffic and, you know, having a at-grade crossing over that. So we're often getting quite expensive schemes, but it's not necessarily clear that they are necessarily the right scheme that's necessary. So I think we can definitely see going ahead that we'll need more money than we have at the moment. I think the pipeline that we are building up, by giving local authorities a sort of share of money for just development of schemes, there is a huge amount of schemes in the pipeline. I think it's important to always check whether what you're planning to do is the right solution still at the time, and whether, in light of especially of changing travel patterns, we need to revisit these things regularly again. But yeah, we will need more money. It's definitely the case. I mean, we're aiming for about £20 per person per year, which would be over 60 million every year. But, yeah, that wouldn't be crazy.
Excellent. We've just like a question from one of the delegates who put forward, possibly to you, Natalie, again, sorry. How even is the uptake of active travel initiatives across different parts of Wales?
In terms of schemes being put forward, it's uneven, but not as uneven as one would think. So there's you know, there are local authorities all over Wales who are putting forward quite ambitious schemes. As I say, they're not necessarily all of equal quality, and we are quite harsh in the way we score schemes. So I wouldn't say that we are there everywhere, but it's definitely not just Cardiff who's trying to do something, which is sometimes a perception in the media.
Just, given the uncertainty arising from COVID in respect of the traffic levels and to achieve a drastic reduction in them, what do development plans need to do to set the framework to achieve this over the 15-year period, given the need to demonstrate deliverability? I'll open that question up to both of you.
Okay, Rob, it's Mike here. What development plans need to do is to design for less surface motorised transport, and that is perfectly achievable. And in some places within the UK, that's exactly what's happening. So the traditional transport approach is to look at traffic and to assume a growth in traffic.
Mike,
proportion, I think Mike there. Yeah, sorry, we got Mike back now.
To growth in economy, and what the development plans need to do, in my view, is to scrap that.
Unfortunately, I think you break it up slightly there, Mike. So I'll just pass over to Natalie quickly, just on another question. Natalie, you've got a question from Chris. Says, are you confident that the emerging Wales transport strategy reflects active travel as a priority appropriately?
Yes, I am. I think so. We are still working on the draft transport strategy, but it is very much based on a sort of sustainable transport hierarchy and the need to reduce carbon emissions, and active travel is running right through it as a something that we are focusing a lot of attention on.
Thank you. This one for you, Mike. How can the technological change be rolled out in rural communities, or do we have to accept that vehicles will still dominate rural movements? I think Mike's still struggling there. Natalie, do you have any views on that?
What was this, the rural area question, was it? Oh, Mike?
Sorry. Hopefully I'm back now.
I think, we're just having a few problems.
Can you actually hear me? I'm being told that I'm very quiet.
Yeah.
No?
No, we can hear you now, Mike.
Am I on? You guys can hear me. Thank goodness for that.
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, rural vulnerability, I think was the question. Different things, different places, but and certainly rural England are looking into this, but it's not necessarily the case that all accessibility in rural environments need to depend upon the single use of the private car. There are a variety of different accessibility methods. Some of them will include active travel, some of them online plus deliveries. It may even be that in some rural areas, local facilities get a boost because of this sort of internalisation of local living. So it's not necessarily the case that rural vulnerability requires substantial or only use of the private car. It'll be one of the 20 different methods of mobility and accessibility that's available. I'm hoping you guys heard that.
Yes, we had all of that, Mike. Excellent, thank you. To both presenters, do they think there's potential to establish a car and bike club in Wales, and should this be supported financially by the Welsh Government?
A car and bike club? Well, there are car clubs. They're not exactly all Wales coverage. And we have public bike hire in some locations. So I think we would certainly want to see schemes like that available elsewhere and to grow. And where there is a good business case for it, we will also consider that for funding.
If I can add to that, there are some places in Europe where the authority takes on the responsibility for car share clubs. I think actually Brain is one of them, and it operates as a commercial enterprise. And that's the way they've used to actually spread them out around the city and around the region. So the answer is yes, there is a potential.
Excellent. Guys, I'm mindful we're coming towards the end of the session now, so I wonder if you have any sort of final comments or synopsis yourselves in moving forward, and what use, if there's anything that you see is going to sort of the challenges that we face in the next 12 months, really.
Yeah. Sorry, Natalie, go first.
No, it's just because I'm presumably mostly speaking to a planning audience. I think it's worth reflecting on the sort of how we can improve the interaction between planning and how it enables active travel even better. And I said that with the draft NDF and PPW10, we sort of have a new foundation on which this should be really easy, but that in practice there seems to be still quite a lot of rub and a sort of a worry about whether arguments about viability will undermine delivery of schemes that get watered down in the process of going through the various planning stages, and active travel is the thing that is being cut because it still seems to be more discretionary. And so I think what I'd be interested in is thoughts and ideas how we can make that sort of the right policy direction, how we can translate that into better practice on the ground, and what is there that Welsh Government can do still to make that easier and better.
Okay, thanks. From my point of view, it's be bolder than we are at the moment. We're trying to fit elements of sustainable living into a situation without actually inconveniencing the situation that we're already used to. And I did see the question about the Wales transport strategy. It says the right words, but actually the delivery, I'm not seeing it. You might think of it the other way around. Look at sustainable accessibility as the primary purpose. Roads come next. And when you think of the difference, we were talking about budgets for roads and for active travel, the difference is massive. Think of it the other way around, probably because we've got to. otherwise we're not going to hit those targets. So apologies for that, but it's be bold.
Our budgets aren't actually, it's certainly not 1 to 10 at the moment.
Yeah, there we go.
It's more like 1 to 4 maybe.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, guys. Well, unfortunately, I think we've come to the end of today's webinar. So on behalf of the RTPI, I'd like to thank both Natalie and Mike for such engaging presentations. Thank you to our sponsors, Savills and Francis Taylor Buildings. And thank you for joining us today. We hope you'll join us tomorrow for the 2 webinars. The first one, which is Where is Policy Now? Practical Approach to LDPs at 10:30. And the second is the role and relevance of climate change on planning in Wales at 2 o'clock with the always captivating Morag LSQC. And finally, I look forward to seeing you all in person at next year's annual conference. Thanks very much.